Hello and welcome to Pods Like Us. I'm Martin Quibell, known to my friends as Marv, and this time I'm speaking with Damian from the Podcast Advice Show. Hey, Damian, thanks for speaking today.
You're very welcome, Martin. Can I call you Marv? Can we just dive into Marv, or is that
yep,
okay?
Just straight into the Marv. Yep, that's fine.
Marvelous.
So, pun not intended. So, what was your first podcast listen?
Great question. It was Serial back in 2014, the true crime podcast, the spin-off from This American Life. I think I was still working in radio at that point, and podcasting at that point had not blown up the way that things like Netflix had done yet. And I was like, okay, no, I feel like I've got to start paying attention to this thing that's managed to get into my psyche, and people have recommended it. So yeah, Serial was the first thing. And I remember thinking, this is not what, from a radio perspective, this is not what a radio station would put out in the UK as a podcast. Normally that's just the Scott Mills show replay. I was like, hang on, this is like a very specific piece of journalistic audio. And at that point, I remember thinking, wow, this is a game changer for the medium, because listener expectations aren't just regurgitate what you hear on FM or DAB. This is a whole different level of content.
That's interesting that you're looking at that from a previously having worked in the radio industry point of view, because there is a difference there between radio shows and podcast per se, in a sense. And I think one of the big differences is the deep dive philosophy into things that sometimes the radio won't pick up on, because there's no commerciality to some of these things. And I found that a lot I spoke with EJ Kirby, who created a few shows for Blanchard House. They're not audio dramas, they're sort of like docudramas in essence. And then also with Rosie Pye from Blanchard House, and a few other people who used to work for, shall we say, the corporation, the Beeb. And they were saying that, and I get the impression that what they're doing in a way with their shows, I mean, it doesn't really touch on the Podcast Advice Show as much, but it's just a tangent I'm going on. But what their shows do, it allows them to do a deep dive into a subject where a corporation like the BBC will be looking at the finances and will it make the numbers, whereas they're going deep dives into these subjects because you've got the whole world basically as an audience, that you're going to get that audience for these niche subjects.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, in America, you've got NPR, National Public Radio. Obviously, over in the UK, there's the BBC. And a lot of those radio stations were doing that type of content. But because your ears are very special, yours in particular, and we consider quite carefully what we put in them. So if you think the traditional commute is in a car, maybe 30, 40 minutes, you're just going to bang on the radio. Then you're going to get into the office all day, listen in the car, and then you're going to kind of come home. How much of a challenge it would have been for those radio stations to get that attention for your commute. Again, certainly from a commercial perspective, you need your traffic news, or you need your personalities, or you need your daily fix of whatever's in the top 40. So on the face of it, a documentary about a true crime sort of case gone wrong, something that would never get into your headspace 10, 15 years ago. But now, absolutely. So those platforms, those stations, those broadcast networks that are doing it have found it's a new lease of life for them, and also really changed our sort of accessibility to content through podcasting. So in that moment, I was like, okay, there's something here, and that you're not, even as a podcaster, you're not beholden to the gatekeepers. So even now, though, if you've got a really good idea for the BBC, you've got to pitch it to get funding. And if they say no, stuff them, go and make it yourself. I think challenging the gatekeepers, there's no geographical barriers when it comes to podcasting. In theory, anyone can start a podcast about anything, anywhere, anytime. And if there's the right push behind it and the right audience, it will do very well. So I think it also challenged that gatekeeper model of actually, we do all the content, thanks. It kind of put the power into the hands of a lot of people.
Yeah, but you've also got the thing that I always say, that if it's something that you're interested in, there'll be people all over the world who are also interested in that as well. So that's the good thing about.
I mean, imagine
well.
trying to pitch this. Yeah, imagine trying to pitch this show and say, I'm not going to make it until somebody pays me to make it. The beauty of podcasting is if you're passionate enough, you'll get an idea off the ground, and you'll stick with it or not. But the podcasting now, you can listen to any type of genre of podcasting and feel inspired by that as a creator. So you're not just limited to whatever your parents would have on in the car, or whatever the commercial music radio is pumping out, or whatever BBC Radio 4 is doing. They're all focused around a very specific niche for one reason or another. You don't really have those barriers with podcasting. And in podcasting is proving that you don't need that strict barrier.
It's true. So going from Serial, and then I'm guessing other shows that you would then be pulled into, and you'd probably be listening to Serial and thinking, what is this podcast world? I'll listen. What's another show that I can listen to? And this is interesting. And being pulled and sucked into that world. What made you suddenly decide to flip that and go, do you know what? I'll create my own podcast.
I was working with a comedian friend of mine at the time on the radio called Paul Gannon. So he does the wildly successful, massively underrated, please go and listen, Cheap Show podcast, which is turning 10 years old. And that's kind of like a anti-austerity rummage through charity shops to find classic board games that people don't play with anymore, and generally just have a bit of fun with the charity shop haul. And I said to Paul, do you want to do a podcast? Like, you've just started Cheap Show. Should we do one together? Immediately thinking, I don't really have an idea, but just see if there's an idea. So we did a podcast called The Fictionary. We did one season of it, and it was the funny side of the dictionary, one episode at a time, one letter at a time, looking at those words that have sort of fallen out of favor over the years and trying to either bring them back or discuss them. And generally, I'm a big fan of language. I like communicating. I talk a lot, sorry. And so I was like, it needs a kind of niche. Even then, you need something a bit different to stand out. So yeah, we started doing a podcast. We learned a lot about doing that together. Really enjoyed it. And yeah, never looked back from there, really. There was a bit of a gap from the Fictionary until Wrestling with the Champ, which was who didn't have a lockdown pod, right? But yeah, I just always remember thinking this is the start of podcasting for anyone who just wants to pick up a microphone and be willing to sort of commit to an idea for a bit. So yeah, it's pretty much as soon as I started listening to a podcast, I was like, I'm going to give it a go and learn what it's about, see if I can add some radio knowledge and skills to the mix, and go from there.
It's a strange history in podcasts, because I mean, I started listening early on to podcast, so seeing that growth in podcasting is fascinating. So the journey then from there to the podcast advice show.
Oh, okay. There is a bit of a messy middle, as they say in storytelling. When Ant McGinley and myself did Wrestling with the Champ, I sort of dragged him into that, kicking and screaming. He was a friend that I worked with in Southampton in the radio. And I remember pitching the idea of Wrestling with the Champ to him. And I said, look, you're at home. All you've got to do is read it. I'll edit it, mix it, blah, 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 blah. Just, you're big, you're outlandish, you're ginger, you're going to be perfect for it. Let's just give it a go. And so I kind of dragged him through that, kicking and screaming a bit. And as soon as the lockdowns were over, I said, look, we're going to take this show out and perform it as a comedy show at the festivals. Because I'd done stand-up comedy 10 years previously in sort of a break between radio, and I really missed it. Yep. What I didn't miss was driving 2 hours, doing 10 minutes on stage, getting absolutely no laughs, then having to drive home 2 hours later, questioning my life choices. So I was like, I feel like I've got something that I can bring to the stage now that isn't just average white man in a hoodie telling stories about being fat or being a dad. I was like, I need a bit more than that. So anyway, cut a long story short, we started doing that podcast, then we started doing it as live shows. Then we were asked to join the Sports Social Podcast Network, which if anyone listening has a sports podcast, talk to them. They're really good. You'd be in safe hands. And so we said yes. Like, ours is a wrestling comedy. It's a bit out there. It's a bit different. It's not like a banter pod. It's not a weekly wrestling review. It's scripted wrestling comedy. I don't think we'll fit, but we'll give it a go. So we joined the network. We had a great experience. And then for me, something clicked. I was like, I feel that we could be doing more from a comedy perspective.
Yep.
And so I set up my own network called Podomedy, the Podcast Comedy Network. It's a portmanteau, one of those words that doesn't really get used very much. And then from there, the Podcast Advice Show was born because we then started having conversations with comedians and funny podcasters about how they could come into the network and also how we could help mentor them. Because for me, even my experience with the Sports Social Podcast Network, I still felt there was something missing in terms of a network offering for podcasters. Because the idea is a network will benefit when a show grows and has huge numbers. The average podcast doesn't have huge numbers. But how do you move the needle for those independent shows? So we started talking to comedians, funny podcasters, saying we want to try and mentor you as well a bit with some advice to try and bridge the gap between I started in lockdown, or I, like I said before, low barrier to entry. I bought my kit from Amazon. I'm recording. I've got 8 listeners. What am I doing wrong? The answer is you're doing nothing wrong, but you need a strategy. Or I've started a podcast and I've done it for a year, but the audience isn't growing anymore. The answer is you didn't start with a strategy, but whatever you started with was enough to get you here. What you probably need is a reset or a break or a rethink because your audience may now have changed, or what you're talking about may have changed, or you've just kind of run out of steam. So trying to work with comedians, funny podcasters at all levels to improve their shows, because and I'm sure we'll get to a lot of people are very time poor. If you are doing a podcast, you're choosing to make yourself time poor because you've got to add the recording time to your calendar. You've got to add the editing time to your calendar, the time it takes to chase guests to be on your podcast, if that's your thing, the time it takes to promote your stuff on social. So at that point, you don't have time you're literally just doing whatever you think instinctually is right. So from that conversations with those comedians and funny podcasters, I was like, we should probably just formalize this in a podcast and also not have the same conversation several times over if you can bake it into a podcast and really focus. So that the remit for the Podcast Advice Show is to bridge that gap between indie podcaster and the shows that get 100,000 downloads or 1 million, right? You're not actually going to close that gap. You can't turn every show into a monster show, but you can help people stop burning out, focus on more of the right things, get shorter, quicker answers, not have to spend an hour watching microphone review videos on YouTube. So for shows on our network, we talk to them all the time about mentoring. For everyone else, we're giving a bit of game away for free, but also still learning from guests that are on the show at the same time, because we also don't know the answers, but primarily we want to be a support to anyone that is doing a podcast, that they've got somewhere to go and hang out and feel like they are part of the industry. Because grassroots podcasting, indie podcasting is the majority of the podcast industry.
Yeah.
If you took that out, you've got very high profile podcast money making machines that will do very well, but actually you're losing the base of podcasting that is really the essence of what podcasting is about. So yeah, just trying to make people that start a podcast feel that they are part of the industry and not that they have to buy their way into an industry, or they can't be part of the industry unless a network says, sorry, you don't have 500,000 listeners, you can't be in it. That wouldn't seem particularly fair now, would it?
No, that's true. So what you said there about independent podcasters, it's I've used the analogy before of the punk movement in music, where that was the alternative, and in this case, podcasting started as the alternative and the underground, and became part of. It's become part of. It's a major media force now. Podcasting, the same as punk became a major musical force. And to make that, you've got to have that almost cavalier back room of your house sort of mentality of going out there and putting yourself out to get it there. And I think that's what brought podcasting to that point.
I love the punk analogy. I love
Yeah.
the punk analogy, and I think I I treasure the podcast industry in all its forms, in everything that Spotify does and Apple does to move the needle. They are driven by commercial goals, and profit is not a dirty word. Making money is not. I don't have a problem. I very much support that. My mortgage will tell you I got to make money too. What why Podomedy exists specifically for comedy is a love of comedy, but born out of that, the podcast advice show is just to give people more of a resource and to know that they are valued and they are treasured and they can hit a button and there's 20 minutes of advice for free on tap. There are some podcast agencies, again, everyone's got to make money, that will do consultancy, and we can have those conversations, but I don't think also it's right to say to someone that really loves their podcast but can't understand why it can't get past 50 listeners, you've got to pay your way to better knowledge all the time, or you've got to have 5,000 tools to help you do it. I think fundamentally it's about making sure that person keeps loving podcasting, because otherwise more people will churn and you will just get a disparity between those that want to and those that can because they've got agents or are well connected. Again, no challenge with either of those things, but if my neighbor is making a podcast, what can I do to help him? If it's up here, how can I share it and be useful? So yeah, if we can help, we will help.
What you're helping them with is basically like all of us. We make mistakes in the world of podcasting. We learn from those. And the lessons that we learn from that are these things that we're passing on to people, really, to say, basically, we made these mistakes, or this is a way that you could go forward with your podcast if you're stuck with these little things that we were stuck with back in the day.
Yeah, I agree. And you never have to start a podcast alone. That's one of the
No.
phrases we use in the network, because actually there are a ton of resources out there. You've had podcast guests already that know exactly how to help and support, and they do. So if we can be another voice in that mix that's readily accessible, then great. Happy to help.
Yep. If you're starting a podcast, it sounds ridiculous in the world of competition, but in podcasting, it's different. Make friends with other podcasters and they will help you out and give you advice. And it's a really good place to be, is in that sort of relationship with people.
I agree.
So you got the show started, and I'm guessing it's part scripted or bullet pointed episodes for each subject. So how do you choose those subjects, and then how do you script that out?
Good question. The target audience is time poor, independent, or grassroots podcasters. So people that are getting by and hitting record and needing to have a bit more of an understanding at the end of the episode than they did. So we tend to look at episode titles in maybe from like a blogging perspective. How would it work from an SEO perspective, this title? But also how would it be quite interesting to the average person? I think if you're putting a podcast into the content mix in your daily life, the average person is bombarded with 3,000 messages from all over the place, whether it's social media, the television, the radio, billboards, things that people say to you in your house, meetings that you have at work. So your podcast needs to be competitive in that space, not just it's a podcast, people will find it. So we tend to approach the titles and the topics in the same way and try to work out what one piece of information somebody would be interested in, and not like a massive deep dive. Like there are 2 episodes that we have recorded. One of them is on the ethics of true crime podcasting. So again, back to that persona of somebody that either wants to start a podcast or has started and needs a bit of a nudge or a steer. So one of those personas would be somebody that loves the true crime genre, has binged it for 10 years and has thought, I finally had a eureka moment in the bath and I want to do one. Where do you go specifically to find out how you would get started or where the perils might be? So how do you stay on the right side of the law? In radio, we've got Ofcom that will police the regulations and they do broadcast media in the UK. Podcasting doesn't have that. So wouldn't it be helpful to look at that, those challenges and those opportunities for somebody telling a story like that and then offer them some advice? So yeah, that's how we'll kind of look at it. Niche podcasting is another thing you really want to do. Try not to copy another podcast you really like verbatim because it's got to kind of be in or around what you're doing if you believe in it. So how do you find your niche voice, those sorts of things. So again, we really think about that person starting in a room like this with some kit and needing a steer or a guiding hand and keep coming back to that person. So actually it's not an industry news podcast. I'd say if you work in the podcast industry and you find it valuable to listen to, amazing. But
Yeah.
we're not targeting you specifically. We're trying to keep giving that leg up to people that just need a nudge every couple of weeks. And so that's for us, when we talk about how to maybe reset your podcast after a season or two seasons, is remind yourself of that target audience. And quite often that is you. Quite often the person you're trying to talk to in his subconscious is you. It's the thing that you're into and you're hoping just to find other like-minded people. So for us starting a podcast, talking about other people trying to start a podcast, it's a complete circle.
Another good side to it is to your show is that so you yourself and Ant have decided that you're going to discuss these subjects specifically for each episode, and then you get. I mean, when I was talking with Claire Waite Brown doing podcasting 2.0 in practice, that show, you're similar in that way, where you'll pick guests that are perfectly chosen in a way to discuss that subject with as well. So
Yeah. We'll start guest last. Guest because it's audience first, guest last. So audience first, topic that matches them, questions they might like to ask or be asking themselves that we can try to answer. And then if we can add a layer of expertise, because we're not the be all and end all of podcasting, but if we can add a layer of another voice to the mix for an authority or a different opinion, then we'll find a guest to match. So we'll often be that rather than, and these are sometimes people that we know through the podcast show in London or working in podcasting, and we'll reach out and say, hey, we've got something you'd be perfect for. But we don't start with a guest and then mold the topic around them, because I think then we lose the show becomes about what the guest knows and how good the guest is.
yeah,
We start with the audience, and then if a guest fits, we'll go with them.
that's good because then you've decided what the topic is, what you're going to discuss, and then you might suddenly think to yourself, after you've done all this, you might think, this might work for this specific person. So, like you said, it's not a case of what guest do we want, what can we tailor around them. It's getting the subject and then deciding if or not a certain person would work for it. And I'm guessing that if there's ever a subject you come across and you think a guest doesn't come to mind, and you're just like, do you know what, this show is okay as it is, you'll just go, that show goes out as it is. It doesn't need the guest to add any extra to it.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. We always have that target audience, that person that started a podcast in their garden office in mind. And if it's not going to be useful for them, we won't add it in. But no, I mean, the other way that we're looking at expanding it is conversations lined up with podcast hosts, software providers for podcasting, because actually choosing the right tools when you've got no budget and every tool is $9 a month, $25 a month, $40 a month. How do you know? And all of a sudden, podcasting becomes quite expensive. If the average show it would generate at most $200 a month, and for some people who are doing podcasting in their spare time, that is a reasonable amount of money to get a return from your efforts. You might find yourself, the industry might be saying, but you've got to pay that back. You've got to spend $29 on Riverside. And we use Riverside and we love it and we're fortunate enough to be able to afford it. But if someone says, I don't have $29, we'll say, you know what? Here's Google Meet. or here's Zoom, or here's another way that you can work around it. So again, I don't want people to feel like they've got to buy their way into all of these things. So yeah, we'll have those conversations with those software providers and obviously share the benefits of doing that. But the takeaway for me isn't a big hard sell on that. It's just no. Oh, I know what Riverside is. Okay, I can't afford it right now. I'm absolutely fine with that.
So you use Riverside to record, and do you use what do you do with your editing?
Great question. I am old school in a radio sense. So for the past 25 years, I've been able to edit audio on things like Audition with my eyes closed at speed. Like working commercial radio, if you have a piece of audio that needs turning around in the space of a song or two songs, that could be 3, 4, 5 minutes, and then it needs playing out. So quite often you've learned that muscle memory to edit at pace to a high quality. So I use Reaper. I absolutely love Reaper. I think from radio started and used commercial radio used Adobe Audition all the time, or Cool Edit Pro as it used to be.
Yep.
And then yeah, from that when I moved out of radio, I started using Reaper because I found it so useful, particularly for voiceovers as well. When I was doing voiceovers in lockdown, it was a cheaper, more affordable tool, and there were lots of tutorials, lots of how-to, lots of advice. So maybe in a weird way, Marv, I'm paying back that advice on setting up Reaper and just paying it back into the podcasting world. But yeah, Reaper. But Riverside actually for the video stuff.
Yeah.
I don't know that I'd edit a full audio episode in Riverside because it offers to the AI tools are really useful. This is not a plug, by the way, but it will offer to take out pauses and make it as short and as quick as possible. For me, that's designed for the 1 second attention span on social media, which is all right. I use that for video. But when you're editing audio, you like a pregnant pause, you like a gap, you like some thinking time. You don't want to feel that it's edited so tightly together at breakneck speed. And the challenge could be if you are a newbie into podcasting, you think that I'll just switch on all these features and that's good, right? You also need to know how to use them. So for me, Riverside for video is really handy, and Reaper for the old audio.
Yeah, when I started, I had a nasty habit of cutting out so much stuff, and now I'm more relaxed with the edit. So because I think that when you're listening on a radio station back in the day, for instance, when you had shows like these on there, there's a comfort to it. There's almost the Radio 4 analogy that you put the Radio 4 on because it's comfort food in the background there to listen to. And if it's sort of like really quick edits, do bush, bush, bash, bosh, like that, it's not got that comfort, sat down with a cup of tea and a Victoria sandwich or anything, that sort of thing to it.
A sandwich of your choice, or a Chelsea bun or whatever. But I think that shows that you're paying attention to how your audience wants to consume your media. So if I was doing a podcast for care homes,
yeah,
would it be tightly edited, presented by an 18-year-old who's starring in a Nando's commercial, or would it be something that is aimed more at, so back to the target audience that likes to see itself reflected back? So would I want something a bit more considered that is talking to the relatives of residents and giving me a look inside? And I would expect it to sound more BBC-ish, more soundscaping, more immersive, there is an environment that you're recording this podcast in. Therefore, put me sound-wise in that environment and give me lift noises and door handles and chatter in the background and the tea trolley rattling. So all those things actually come into play when you're thinking about editing. And so again, if you're just editing a one-to-one podcast like this, a chat, just a nice tight edit on any software is fine. But yeah, you can really go to town with soundscaping and adding wild tracks and stuff like that. So I suspect a lot of podcasters still go old school and use an actual piece of software rather than anything in the cloud.
So sound and music for the show then?
Yeah, we just have one piece of music that we use for our intro and outro. Nice and simple for a bit of brand recall and brand awareness.
Yep.
And then what we've started doing, because the show is reasonably new, is just adding a bit of music under our guest answers just to add a bit more pace to it. because between Ant and I, we talk a lot. So probably about half the episode ends up in the bin. And that is really to respect the listener's time, but also to allow the appropriate time for our guest to respond. Like the more time you just chit chat between the two of you, and then the guest is, oh, sorry, I forgot you were there. Could you give us an opinion? Like they're the stars of the show, and that's the main attraction. That's what people came to listen to every week. So yeah, we started putting a little bit of music underneath them. Feels cool, makes it sound a bit like a package on the radio, like a little feature. But yeah, it's all library stuff, which has changed the podcasting game. People often say, "Can I put music in a podcast?" Yeah, you can, as long as you sourced it in the right way. And if that means paying someone $15 once, just do it. Don't be so tight. That
Yep.
person has created something very useful, and if you see value in it, just buy them a coffee or something.
Oh. And the show logo itself, with you and Ant there in that picture.
Yes, yes. Fun fact about that picture: I am not as tall as I'm not as tall as him in
Yeah.
real life. That photo was taken at the Audio Production Awards in 2024. The official we were there early, and the official photographer was standing around with nothing to do. And I was like, and this is a pro tip, right? If you know anyone, give them your phone and say, "Can you take a photo of me?" Because they'll do a better job. And the guy took a photo at the APAs, and then when I was looking around for some artwork, I was like, me and Ant don't really have a lot of photos together when we're not in wrestling gear at the Edinburgh Fringe or something like that. So yeah, it looked nice. But when I did the first mock-up, there is a height difference, not much, and I promise you it's not an inferiority complex. But I thought more from a leveled perspective, I just photoshopped myself up a bit. So yeah, I do the artwork for the show myself. We use Canva
Yeah.
for a lot of that stuff. Although what I found interesting on artwork is having submitted something to Apple Podcasts for their sort of consideration, you need to send Photoshop files, really, PSD files. And so Canva won't export in PSD. So if you are thinking, hey, I've got a good show, and Apple will like it to be reasonably timely. So if you've just recorded a series of interviews with World Cup legends, and guess what? The World Cup is 3 months away. Tell Apple about it, and they'll probably stick it on their front page for a bit because it would make sense. They're big fans of that time you listen, but you'll need to get ahead of that in terms of what software you use. There are converters. I don't know enough to know that if you just convert your file from PNG to PSD, Apple will love it. Apple might like a PSD because they want to edit it a bit and jiggle it around. They've got very specific artwork recommendations as well. So if you are looking for a very cheap photo editing bit of software that can handle PSDs, Pixelmator, if you've got a Mac or a Windows computer. I mean, are there any other types? Pixelmator, I think, is about $50, and it's just as powerful for the average person, i.e., me, to do Photoshoppy type stuff. So have a think if you're going to stick. That's for free, giving away game for free. Some artwork there. We've just done that for the Podcast Advice show, actually, to try and get a bit of promo for in and around the podcast show in London, which is May.
There we go. Should we go to this? Actually, I will go. We will go now to the questions that have been sent in. Have been sent in to us. Okay, what we got? So first from DJ Scoob, who does Undiscovered Entrepreneur.
Very nice.
He
Hello.
said, "How do you constantly stay curious during an interview to keep the conversation going?"
How have you stayed curious, Marv?
I know.
I think so. How would I prepare for an interview? I've rewritten the question there. How
Yeah.
would I prepare for an interview in advance? I would only ever write 5 questions. When I used to work in radio and I interviewed Amy Winehouse once when she was touring her first album, but then I realized at the end of it I forgot to hit record, and there are a few regrets. And she did.
I
She
did that.
performed. She performed 2 songs in a ukulele, just me and her in a studio,
Yeah.
and got to hit record. Absolutely furious with myself. Or I did, but maybe it was like you needed to do a double tap. Anyway, to answer the question, I would prepare 5 questions and think about how you anticipate them answering the question.
Yeah.
And think about those questions from a listener perspective. So I did an interview with, oh gosh, the guys that were in Captain America, the guy that plays Captain America now and the guy that played the Winter Soldier. I interviewed
Yeah.
them and tried to think about that from I'm a Marvel fan. What do I want to know perspective? And that helps you stay curious. The other thing is probably if the answer you've got from them is not great, or you felt it went nowhere, or they just kind of padded around for a minute, it's okay to edit that question out or that answer out and not use it. Sometimes it's not the question's fault. Sometimes that person has had a mind blank and they can't think of anything. I mean, you can send them the questions in advance to help them prepare for that. But yeah, I think curious if you just spend a bit of time learning about them, thinking about that person and how they would answer it, and then thinking about the person listening to it, what they would find useful.
I did the same thing as you did years ago. I was tasked to interview Tony Wright from Terrorvision, the lead singer of Terrorvision,
Yeah.
and so I got the. This is back in the day, so you got the little dictaphone that you place on the desk
Yeah.
to record the conversation, and so put it on the desk. And I forgot to record the whole half an hour
Oh,
conversation that we had. Got back home and then went to press play and thought, "You idiot! You forgot to press play." And but that's a schoolboy error where you do an interview after they've done a gig in a pub,
yeah.
and as an interviewer, I consumed a few beers during enjoying that performance.
Easily done. Easily
Yeah,
done. I mean, what I learned, I don't know what your takeaway was from that, but mine was just to hit record a minute before you think you need to, and just check all your levels, and just make it
yeah,
add part of podcasting. We've talked about this in an episode already. Is building a better workflow and a better process to make sure you don't get those moments. So yeah, if it does happen to you, try. It will happen to you if you're listening.
yeah.
You will muck it up at some point. We've all done it.
We have. Yeah.
Yeah.
We've all thought that we've recorded entire episodes and then suddenly
Yeah.
realised that it wasn't recorded and you've had to
Yeah.
start all over again and pretend that it's for the first time.
That was a good question. I enjoyed it. Are there more?
There is one from, here we go. Come on, LinkedIn. This is good, telling you where I'm coming from. This is from a mutual friend of ours, Sam Sethi.
Yes.
Sam from True Fans, who says, I guess his question is, will there ever be mass adoption of micropayments to replace or complement advertising, sponsors, or paywalls/subscriptions, or are we forever doomed to, as he calls it, crappy ads?
Yes is the answer.
Yeah,
The challenge would be how major networks or hosts would profit from that. So, is anyone making money going to willingly offer to make less money? Or does that mean that there'll be more money in podcasting? And where does that money come from? If I think what is beautiful about podcasting is it's freely accessible.
yeah,
The majority of our listeners to Wrestling with a Champ listen on an Android phone and will listen on Castbox, which is not a premium subscription thing. So what does that tell you about your audience? It tells you that they're not going to pay you $4 or $5 a month on Apple, for example. They don't mind advertising. You have to find a different way to monetize your audience. So I think it'll get there, but why would it get there at speed? Where is the urgency and where is the
yeah,
value? At the moment, Apple and Spotify and YouTube seem to want to own the market via video or subscriptions. I don't think micropayments won't get there, but the value would have to be there. So if I'm listening to a podcast, it's interesting. If I'm listening to a podcast, I suppose there's a question there. If I'm listening to a podcast and the host is celebrity, very well known,
yeah,
they'll sell me merchandise. If you like this show, come and buy an exclusive T-shirt or come and buy a ticket to come and see our show. That commercial offering is going to be different to somebody that's doing it at home and who needs every $5 that they can get. So I
yeah,
think actually the less shy independent podcasters are about asking for donations and explaining off the bat why that's useful to support their podcast and the value to the audience, the better. If you're not having a conversation with your audience about being grateful and being thankful and offering them opportunities to be part of your show, because at that level it is a community, it's commercialization at the top. If you're not saying, look, I know I've only got 100 listeners, but if 5 of you gave me $5, that would really move the needle, and have that honest conversation. It's not begging, it's not charity. But I think more people would be more invested. And sometimes people find it really difficult to ask for money. But I think if more indie podcasters start putting that narrative in, it will become more commonplace. Literally, the technology, as Sam will tell you, the technology is there. One tap, done. Happy days. When we do comedy, and we do all our comedy shows are free. Come and see our comedy show for free. And if you like it, tap your phone on our phone on the way out and give us $5. So the technology is there, but you've just got to say, in comedy, we'll do a thing at the end of the show called a bucket speech if your show is free. Hey, you had a free show. It was brilliant. If you liked it, we think we're worth the price of a pint. Come and, if you believe that too on your way out, just tap it. You've got to start having those conversations in your show. Even if it's just your friends and family listening, start having those conversations.
Right. Two great.
There's a long answer for you, Sam.
Yep.
That's a long answer for you. But I think, yeah, who owns the narrative? Someone has to own the narrative. And if the benefit is to put more money into grassroots podcasting, then let them own the narrative and push it forward, because people like Sam will be able to support with that technology.
Absolutely.
There may be some editing in there, Marv. Maybe some in there.
We'll see. We'll see. Everybody likes chat and tangents. That's podcast in a nutshell.
Yeah, true.
But I mean, talking about technology, I still don't know whether I like this phrase really, or this term, podcasting 2.0. Which, like I keep saying, I said it to Ariel when I spoke to Ariel Nissenblatt last week. Essentially, it's just a change in the RSS, or the next stage up for RSS. So what do you think of what's going on in the world of podcasting 2.0? And do you think it gets everything that it needs to make podcasting that next level?
Discoverability is always the challenge.
Yeah.
And consideration is another challenge. So when you say to some, when you bump into Sandra in the co-op and you listen to a podcast you think it would be good for her to listen to, the recommendation is it's funny, or it's this topic, or the way that they shot it. If you take, what's the TV show, Adolescence at the moment, the Stephen Graham one,
Yeah.
the things people say is, oh, it makes you question your parenting, or oh, it's all shot in one go, and isn't that really creative? Nobody ever says, oh, the chapters are really good, or oh, do you know what? I read the transcript and it was brilliant. Things like transcripts and chapters, useful for accessibility, useful for allowing audience to move at pace through your content. I 2.0, 3.0, 4.0 will just keep working out as we go how to iterate and how to do better things quicker, right? We'll just keep hacking podcasting as we come across another challenge. We'll put in another solution. It's useful. Ultimately, for me, what you recommend is the story or the personality or the idea behind it. And I think that's the thing that the podcast industry has to keep driving at to stay creative. So 100% behind how people take payments and how we do SEO. I think that's important, but ultimately word of mouth is an incredible driver in podcasting, and that will transcend any sort of technological phase. One of the things people talk about in podcasts at the moment is video podcasting.
Yeah.
And there's always a debate about whether we should start saying it's not podcasting, let's call it vodcasting. I'll come back to podcast. It's taken 10 to 15 years for the word podcast to be something that the average person knows what it is.
Yeah.
The average person doesn't listen to a podcast, but there are lots of podcast listeners. So if you want to add vodcasting into the mix, again, that person, Sandra in co-op, is, I haven't got time for more phrases. Like, I consume video on the name of the platform. I was on Instagram the other day, or I was on TikTok. They won't say I was watching a vodcast. It won't be, for me, it won't be a piece of terminology that breaks in. So it will just keep evolving. But I think, again, where I would look at the middle ground. So if you're a network or you're a major publisher, or if you're a goal hanger, for example, all the way through your podcast, you'll be doing a lot of the work yourself as an indie podcaster. When you're at that top level, all of those worries, API calls and SEO, someone just wants to turn up, tell a funny story behind a microphone and go. So should it be the burden of the independent podcaster to have to embrace all of this when they don't have the time or the capacity? So I think that's my other challenge is the more that we micro focus on the teeny tiny bits, yes, that's great for an industry to move the needle, but the average person who's doing it in their spare time is going to run out of bandwidth in their head to understand all of it. I do think that's where software and tools can alleviate a lot of the hassle. If there's a button I can put, hey, there's a button I can push that does all the things you said was important, I'm all up for it. And if it's $5 a month, I'll do it. But I think ultimately go back to that storytelling is the most impactful way to do a podcast.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, chaptering works for shows more, I think, that are magazine based in a way where you'll get different sections of a show. So you've got, we've got an interview with blah, blah, blah at this point, and then we're going to do a session with a cook at this point and do a meal, and then we're doing this at this point of the thing. So chaptering works in that way, I think, more so because people are going to these episodes and they're saying, they've got John Turode on in this section 12 minutes and 39 seconds in, and I really want to hear this recipe that is done for bunt or whatever. So I'll go to that, listen to that. Brilliant. I get that. That's for the people that are at the moment and they're like, right, that's all I want to do. I want to go in. I want to listen to this in and out, done like that. But I mean, I worry that in that situation, people will do that more often and miss the meat and potatoes that's around that specific thing that they're after as well. That's a slight worry of mine.
Yeah, and I like the way you say bunt. I think you should say that more. Again, it comes back to, does a podcaster have time to do chaptering? And should they plan that into their work off the bat? And does it matter? And will the industry start to say, actually, if you're not chaptering, you're not going to fall into our algorithms? So the industry could force all of that. But again, the more work you heap onto the indie podcaster, the harder it's going to be for them to keep going.
Yeah, some indie podcasters will just say, like you said, it's a time thing. You've got the time of the record, you've got a time of the edit,
Yeah.
you've got a time of this, you've got time for that, and then someone who's really stuck on time. I mean, I'm out for 75 hours a week for work, but because of travel and that, so you have to fit all that in and your life around it as well. Adding another level to that might cause a decent podcaster to say, do you know what? I really don't have the time to do that. And it'll make them more depressed and bring them down about it and might cause them to leave altogether the podcast.
Yeah, it could do. I mean, the what gets me out of bed every morning, and thanks for asking, is a creative challenge.
Yeah.
So would I give up podcasting if it wasn't creative? Would I not do comedy if it wasn't creative? Yeah. There's the admin side of it that you've got to do. We've got to perform at the Edinburgh Fringe because we said we do it again this year, but there's a ton of admin that goes into it. But it's okay to leave. It is okay to leave stuff out. It's okay to not be in every brochure. It's okay to not spend thousands on billboard advertising. It's okay not to stay in a fancy hotel and sleep on someone's sofa. It's okay just to get it done and sometimes say, I've decided, sorry, that isn't important. Or talk to a consultant, listen to the Podcast Advice Show, and we'll try and help you stay sane as you navigate the world of podcasting.
Yeah, I was just using that as an example. I mean, personally, with this show that I do here, I've always got this thing where I'll listen to shows and now where I'm speaking to experts, I mean, I'll lump you into that because you do a show that's offering advice to people. So when I'm speaking to people like yourself, Ariel, James Cridland in just general chat, I've not recorded a chat with him yet. But when I speak to these people, it sort of helps with this curiosity that I've got within where I'll hear things and I'll be like, I really need to know how that works and what makes them tick and why this show is what it is.
Mm.
It's that innate curiosity within me that pushes me to these conversations where I'm like, I really want to know what it is that makes this what it is.
Yeah, I agree.
So, I mean, here's a stupid question because we've given lots of advice free already. Okay, let's reword this. What would you say are I don't know, let's put a number on this, three necessities for podcast for anybody that's thinking of going into the world?
That's a good question. So at the moment for Podomedy, we're developing three shows that are behind the scenes with people who have not done podcasts before.
Yeah.
And we start right at the beginning, and they come with an idea, and they go, I've got a name, I've got an idea for a bit of artwork. I know who my type of guest would be, and we'll go, okay, cool. We're just going to sit down and help you do some due diligence. So, have you Googled that name? Have you thought about what your show really is? So when you are asked to pitch it to somebody at an event or sell it to a friend, you can do that in 7 to 10 words. So, and if you haven't, it's all good, but we'll help you really, so I suppose refine your idea before you start. Absolutely fine just to grab a microphone from Amazon and just hit record. You'll find you'll then start asking your questions 6 months down the line of, do I want to keep doing this? If you know why you wanted to do it off the bat, you'll be in a much better place, and that will help you balance it out. Because I think a lot of podcasters run hard and run fast,
Yep.
assuming that there's a glory at the end of it, or that there's this really nice finishing line, or suddenly the harder I work and the more episodes I put out, the more listeners I'll get, right? Not true. The more tired you'll get, the more stressed out you'll get, the more it will impact your life, because you've set a goal, and you've not only have you set a goal, but you've decided how you're going to get that goal without any rationale whatsoever. And I'm not saying it's wrong, but would a second opinion help just to balance that out, for example? So I'd say refine your idea before you start your idea. Write down a piece of paper who it's for, how you would describe it in 7 to 10 words. Do some artwork research as well. You might have a really great image in your head. I'm not trying to get away from that, but is somebody else using it? Or does that image have other connotations? Or you can use Google Lens now, for example, on smartphones, just say what comes up when all these little things that if you did it, you then got to unpick it if it wasn't right. So I say refine. The other one would be, so in branding, in marketing, in business, the advice would be, if you are a founder-led organization and if you're an independent podcaster, you've founded it yourself, right? It's your story to tell. You can never tell your founder's story enough. You can never tell your origin story enough. So your origin story is why you bothered to start podcasting in the first place. Don't assume that you're 25 episodes in and therefore everyone knows your origin story. Also, don't ask people to listen to 25 episodes before they get your origin story. Find ways on social media or throughout your podcast or even in introduction in 7 to 10 words. Hi, my name's so-and-so. Here's why I do the podcast. Here's why I love it. Or make sure your passion for what you're doing comes across somehow. That forms a part of your founder's story. So if you're not telling that, nobody is connecting with you as a host. You've presented a well-formed idea that sounds good, but to build a connection, they've got to understand why you're giving up your time to do it, or why this story is important for you to tell. So it might be slightly different in the case of journalistic podcasting, where your job is to sort of hide behind and tell the story. But for the most people that are doing podcasts like this, just keep telling your origin story, or make sure it's in your trailer, or pin it, make a little short video on Instagram and pin it on your profile, so that when people do discover you for the first time, they've got that really good jumping in point. And that's why you're making your podcast. And the third bit of the third bit of advice, find somebody to do it with, or to, it can be a lonely game. So Ant's not here, he's off on holiday. One of his big things is don't do it alone. Find somebody to do it with, have somebody to sense check it with. Whatever don't do it alone means to you, don't do it alone. I'd say you probably just need it, even if it's just a support network. So if that means you can only podcast in the evening, but yet you've got to put your kids to bed, if there's a neighbor that can sit with the kids while they're asleep for an hour while you podcast, that counts as don't do it alone. Don't
Yeah.
feel that you've got to podcast with them in the house, or it could be a lonely journey because certainly in the early days when you're trying to build engagement and you've got no listeners, you're not getting, it's not a two-way street between you and the people listening. So having somebody else out there would be helpful. So whatever don't do it alone means, even if it means being on social and starting up a little community group or a newsletter or anything, find some way to get some feedback. Is that good?
That's really good. Great. There you go. Tip top advice. So, what shows do you like to listen to yourself?
I've got my phone here. If you don't mind, I will be completely honest and show you. I won't show you, but I will tell you. This is like when Michael McIntyre does Send to All in Audible. So I have to. Where do I listen to podcasts? Spotify and Audible, and that's. I've got an iPhone for work, but I hardly use it. So my phone is an Android. So Spotify and Audible. A lot of the Audible stuff I have are audio books, to be fair, for the kids, or Doctor Who Big Finish stories that you can get on Audible, which I absolutely love. So I love audio books. So if we put podcasting in the same space, love that. Specific podcasts, Donald Miller. If you're into branding, I recommend building a story brand. So Donald Miller does this great sort of pitch for companies that don't know how to reflect back on themselves. And so he's got a couple of audiobooks that you can listen to. And it's basically, this goes back down to your descriptor and what your podcast actually is versus what it is in your mind's eye. So we say the podcast advice show, it does what it says on the tin, right? It's pretty basic, but it's the go-to place for tips and takeaways. It's a podcast for podcasters. It's very obvious, allow people to qualify in or out if it's not them. If you're a business, how clear is your message? How clear is your branding? So a podcast, apply that thing. If your podcast is called Mavis and Jack and it's backed by Spotify, you don't really have to work out too much, but chances are you're an influencer and you can tap into a ready-made audience. But if you're looking to sell or convert or engage people as a podcast, certainly with the micropayment stuff, what you are very early on has to be kind of crystal clear. So Donald Miller can help building a story brand. And on this, Radical Candor is another one, another audio book. If you sort of struggle with feedback or you're quite shy or you're maybe too direct, Radical Candor is good. And on Spotify, it's a mixed bag, I'll be honest. The podcast that's on our network, You Talking to Me, which is like if the marvelous Mrs. Maisel sat down with Graham Norton on a chat show. I love that. I grew up in a part of northwest London in Pinner that's very culturally rich and right in the heart of Jewish community. And more so, I just love all that. I think that it's very funny. The language is brilliant. It brightens me up, and it's something completely different to my normal day. So I'll take that. And the other one is the Curb Your Enthusiasm podcast that Susie and Jeff do. So big Curb Your Enthusiasm fan. And that's really interesting because that's a show that ran for a good amount of time, but still has legs. And what they do is they'll do an episode review every episode. They've got 10, 11 seasons, whatever it is. So the two cast members for the show will sit down and get the guest stars on to talk about what they remember for an episode. So listen to that. And actually that is, if you have episodes that are maybe scripted, that's a good way of getting another season out of what you've done. If you feel that you've kind of run aground, you can go back, and we'll do that with Wrestling with a Champ. We'll go, let's go back, listen to season 1 and talk about that because our audience were invested enough to listen to it. So you can learn a lot about formats and try different formats in your podcast too. Don't feel that you're entirely stuck with the one that you started out with on episode 1.
Yep, agreed. I mean, I've mixed this show up so that originally it was talking to podcasters about their shows.
Yeah.
And now I've mixed it up and I've had people who create videos as well for YouTube and I've had them on talking about that. I've had people in the podcast industry on as well and speaking about the behind the scenes as well. So, yep, there's nothing wrong with mixing it up at all.
Go for it.
Cool. So how can people get hold of you if they want to, Damian?
For the podcast advice show, they can go to getpodcastadvice.com. Don't type in any W's. It does something weird if you do. Just getpodcastadvice.com. If you want to discover comedy podcasts, then you can look for Podomedy, which is the podcast comedy network. Our Wrestling with the Champ is in there, and a ton of other podcasts that you may never have heard of. But we are busy grinding away, becoming the UK's podcast comedy network, and we can't do it without people listening. It is really helpful. So there. And if there's anything you want from me, Instagram, okay, for the odd selfie, or LinkedIn for anything. Do you find it difficult, like straddling the two different personas? Certainly LinkedIn, you consider more who you're supposed to be on LinkedIn than you do on Instagram. Instagram, you can just do whatever you want, but you're aware on LinkedIn how many different eyeballs are on there. So quite often I won't be. I'll be there. I'll be a lurker. I'm an LinkedIn lurker, but you won't find me really hyper engaging in topics because but I'm there. If you want me, I'm there.
Yeah, LinkedIn is almost like the business side of social media in a way. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not very formal. I don't know if you've gathered that. So for me, LinkedIn, it just, I don't know. I love it. Come have a conversation. If I can be useful for you, come and find me on there. I'll accept. For a limited window only, I'll accept everyone over the next 7 days.
Is that the next 7 days from now, or the next 7 days from when the episode comes out in 4 weeks' time?
Oh, you know how to ask a good question. Yes.
You will find out if you do it. The tell there is that LinkedIn, I've had a LinkedIn account now for probably since LinkedIn started.
Right.
And only recently have I really paid that much attention to it, because like I said, there's the industry side to it with LinkedIn that sort of worries me, because I like to be less business and more, I don't know whether I'd say cheeky chappy, but, sort of more open and less business-like.
Yeah. I think authenticity is important. We would preach that in podcasting. So why would we be afraid to do it on LinkedIn? Because people can give us money if we do well on LinkedIn for jobs. I think there's a slight fear there.
You've sold me now. I'm going to do LinkedIn more often. Right. Thanks for speaking with me today, Damian.
Not at all. I really enjoyed it. I'm looking forward to it. When do you want to put it out? There's no wrong answer. I
don't know. We can talk about that after we finish the sign out. Okay?
I'm good. Yeah, okay.
You can find pods like us on any streaming platform. We are on X, as it's now called. I hate that name. Instagram, Facebook, Blue Sky. I'm trying to think of all the other social media places. We're all over the place. Go and look. You'll find pods like us on there. Just look pods like us. Simple enough. And contact us through podlikeus@gmail.com. For £1 a month, if you want to, there's a Patreon as well to find us on there, where you get extra bonus footage, you get video clips with the episodes as well, and some extra bonus episodes. I do diary episodes on there for people when I talk about individual shows that I've been listening to and go into a deep dive on those and what my listening is. So that's £1 a month for that. But anyway, thank you everyone for listening, and hope you listen again to another episode of Pods Like Us.